Hello, and welcome back to Rainy Bedtime Stories. Tonight, the rain is falling gently outside, and I'm so glad you're here with me. There's something beautiful about the kindness that surfaces on rainy days. Maybe it's the way the weather slows us down. Maybe it's how the gray skies make us reach toward one another, seeking warmth in small gestures. Tonight I have 5 true-to-life stories for you. Stories about strangers who became a little less strange, about moments of unexpected tenderness that stayed with me long after the rain stopped. If you enjoy these rainy bedtime diaries, I'd be so grateful if you'd like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so we can share more quiet evenings together. Now, settle in somewhere comfortable. Pull your blanket a little closer. Let your breathing slow. Outside, the rain is beginning to fall. And inside, we're warm and safe together. Let me tell you about a Thursday afternoon when a stranger shared their umbrella with me, and everything changed. It was the kind of Thursday that starts ordinary and becomes something you remember forever. I had spent the morning at a medical appointment across town. Nothing serious, just a routine checkup I'd been putting off for months. The kind of errand that feels heavy on your calendar, but light once it's done. When I left the clinic around 2 in the afternoon, the sky was a solid wall of gray. Not threatening, exactly. Just gray in that way that makes the whole city feel like it's wrapped in wool. I hadn't brought an umbrella. The forecast had said 20% chance of rain, and I'd gambled on the 80%. Standing under the clinic's small awning, watching the first drops begin to fall, I realized I'd lost that bet. The rain started gently. Just a whisper at first, the kind you can almost walk through without getting too wet. But within minutes, it had gathered strength. The drops grew heavier. The pavement darkened in spreading patches. And I knew I was going to get soaked. My bus stop was 3 blocks away, not far under normal circumstances. But those 3 blocks might as well have been 3 miles with rain like this. I waited under the awning for a few more minutes, hoping the rain might ease. Other people came and went from the clinic, most of them prepared with umbrellas or raincoats. One woman hurried past me with a newspaper over her head, splashing through newly formed puddles. The rain didn't ease. If anything, it intensified. I was just resigning myself to a very wet walk when I heard someone beside me say, "Excuse me." I turned to find a man standing at the edge of the awning. He was maybe in his late 40s, with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a brown cardigan under his raincoat, and he was holding a large black umbrella that was still folded. "I couldn't help noticing you don't have an umbrella," he said. His voice was quiet and unhurried. "Are you heading toward the bus stop on Parker Street?" I nodded, a little surprised. "Yes, actually. How did you know?" He smiled gently. "Everyone who comes out of this clinic and doesn't have a car ends up at that bus stop. I've been coming here for my wife's appointments for 3 years now. I know the route by heart." He opened his umbrella with a soft whoosh. It was large enough to cover 2 people comfortably. "I'm parked just past the bus stop," he said. "Would you like to share? It seems silly for you to get drenched when I'm going that way anyway." There was nothing pushy about the offer, nothing that made me uncomfortable. He was just a person with an umbrella, offering to help someone without one. The kind of simple kindness that used to be more common, I think. "That would be wonderful," I said. "Thank you so much." He nodded and held the umbrella up between us. "I'm Arthur, by the way." "I'm glad to meet you, Arthur. I'm the person who trusted a weather forecast that said 20%. He laughed softly. "I've been that person many times. My wife always tells me I should just carry an umbrella every day, but I never learn." We stepped out from under the awning together, and the world became the sound of rain on nylon. The umbrella created a small dome of shelter around us, and I was struck by how intimate it felt. Not in a romantic way, but in a human way. Two strangers sharing a tiny pocket of dryness while the city streamed with water around them. We walked slowly. Arthur adjusted his pace to match mine, keeping the umbrella carefully centered so neither of us got wet. Our footsteps splashed lightly on the wet pavement, and the rain drummed steadily above us. "Your wife has appointments here often?" I asked. He nodded. "Every 3 weeks. She's been dealing with some health issues for a while now, but she's doing well. Better than expected, actually." There was something in his voice when he spoke about her, a tenderness that was so genuine it made my heart ache in the best way. This was a man who clearly loved his wife deeply, who showed up every 3 weeks to drive her to appointments and wait in lobbies and walk through the rain with strangers because his heart was too big to do otherwise. "That's good to hear," I said. "It sounds like she has a wonderful support system." "She has me," he said simply, "and I have her. That's been enough for 32 years. We passed a flower shop with its windows fogged from the warmth inside. Through the glass, I could see buckets of roses and lilies, their colors muted by the condensation. Arthur glanced at the shop and smiled. "I should pick something up for her on the way out," he said, almost to himself. "She always says I don't need to bring her flowers, but I can tell she likes when I do." "She's lucky to have you," I said. He shook his head gently. "I'm the lucky one. She taught me how to be patient, how to slow down, how to pay attention to the small things. Before I met her, I was always rushing, always looking ahead to the next thing. She showed me that the present moment is where everything good happens." The rain continued to fall around us, but under the umbrella, it felt like we were in our own little world. The sounds of the city were muffled. Cars passed with their headlights on, their tires hissing on the wet road. People hurried by with their hoods up or their umbrellas tilted against the wind. But Arthur and I walked slowly, as if we had nowhere else to be. "Can I ask what brought you to the clinic today?" he said. "Only if you don't mind sharing." "Just a checkup," I said. "Nothing serious." I'd been putting it off for a while, and I finally made myself go. "Good for you. It's easy to put those things off. Life gets busy, and before you know it, months have gone by." "Exactly." I kept telling myself I'd schedule it next week, and then next week would come, and I'd push it again. Arthur nodded knowingly. My wife was like that too before. We both were. Always too busy for the things that mattered. It took her diagnosis to slow us down. He said it without bitterness. There was even a kind of gratitude in his voice, as strange as that might sound. Like the hard thing had become, in some way, a gift. "It changed how we live," he continued. "We eat dinner together every night now. We take walks in the evening, even short ones. We say, 'I love you' more. Not because we think time is running out, but because we realized we weren't saying it enough before." I felt something loosen in my chest as he spoke. Something I'd been carrying without realizing it. "That's beautiful," I said. It sounds like you found something valuable in a difficult situation. We found each other again, he said. We'd been married for almost 3 decades, and we found each other again. How lucky is that? The bus stop came into view ahead of us. A small shelter with a bench inside, already occupied by a woman reading a paperback book. I felt a pang of something like regret, knowing our walk was almost over. "This is me," I said as we reached the shelter. Arthur stopped and tilted the umbrella so I could step under the overhang without getting wet. "It was nice walking with you," he said. "I hope you stay dry for the rest of the day. Thank you for sharing your umbrella, and thank you for the conversation. I really enjoyed it." He smiled and the warmth of it reached his eyes. "Take care of yourself. Don't wait too long for your next checkup." "I won't," I promised. He gave a small wave and continued down the sidewalk toward the parking lot, his umbrella bobbing gently above him. I watched him go until he disappeared around the corner of the flower shop. I had a feeling he would emerge with a bouquet for his wife. I stood under the bus shelter, listening to the rain tap against the roof. The woman with the paperback glanced up and gave me a small smile before returning to her book. I smiled back and leaned against the frame of the shelter, watching the rain fall on the empty street. The bus came about 10 minutes later. I climbed aboard and found a seat by the window, where I watched the city stream past in shades of gray and silver. But my mind kept returning to Arthur and his wife, to their 32 years of marriage, and their nightly dinners, and their evening walks. I thought about what he'd said about finding each other again, about how a difficult thing had become a doorway to something deeper. I thought about my own life, my own relationships, the small kindnesses I sometimes forgot to offer. The rain continued to fall as the bus carried me home, but I didn't mind the gray afternoon anymore. Something about that shared umbrella had changed the color of the day. That evening, I called my mother. Not for any particular reason, just to hear her voice. We talked for almost an hour about nothing important. Her garden, a book she was reading, a funny thing her neighbor's dog had done. When we hung up, she said, "This was a nice surprise. We should talk more often." "We should," I agreed. "Let's not wait so long next time." I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the rain that was still falling softly outside. The streetlights had come on, and their reflections shimmered on the wet pavement like scattered stars. I thought about Arthur walking into the flower shop. I imagined him choosing a bouquet, maybe asking the florist to add some baby's breath because his wife likes the way it looks. I imagined him driving home through the rain, the flowers on the passenger seat beside him, already thinking about the moment he'd walk through the door and see her face light up. The tea warmed my hands. The rain whispered against the glass, and I felt deeply, quietly grateful for a stranger with an umbrella who reminded me what matters. Sometimes kindness arrives exactly when you need it. Sometimes it takes the form of a shared umbrella and a slow walk through the rain. And sometimes, if you're paying attention, it changes everything that comes after. I finished my tea and went to bed early that night, listening to the rain against my window. In my dreams, I walked through a city made of silver light, and everywhere I looked, strangers were sharing umbrellas with one another, creating small circles of shelter that overlapped and connected until the whole city was covered. The rain continued to fall, gentle and steady, as I drifted deeper into sleep. And speaking of unexpected kindness, I'm remembering another rainy day now, when something I thought I had lost forever found its way back to me in the most remarkable way. I didn't realize I had lost my wallet until I was already 3 miles from where I'd dropped it. It was a Saturday morning in early November, the kind of morning where the rain hadn't started yet, but the clouds promised it was coming. The air smelled of wet leaves and distant storms, that particular autumn scent that always makes me want to stay indoors with a warm drink and a good book. But I had errands to run, the usual weekend list that accumulates throughout the week, dry cleaning to pick up, a package to mail, groceries for the coming days. Nothing exciting, but the kind of tasks that feel satisfying once they're done. I took the subway to the shopping district on the east side of the city. The train was moderately crowded, and I stood near the doors, watching the tunnel lights flash past in the darkness. When my stop came, I stepped off and climbed the stairs to street level, where the gray sky stretched above the buildings like a canvas waiting for rain. I did my errands in a comfortable, unhurried rhythm. Picked up my dry cleaning from the small shop on 8th Street, where the elderly owner always wraps the hangers in brown paper so carefully. Mailed my package at the post office, waiting in line behind a woman sending birthday gifts to her grandchildren across the country. Bought groceries at the market on the corner, filling my reusable bags with vegetables and bread and the good olive oil that was finally back in stock, times 600 millers. It was nearly noon when I finished. The clouds had thickened while I'd been inside the market, and as I stepped onto the sidewalk with my bags, the first drops of rain began to fall. They were light at first, more like a mist than actual rain, but I knew heavier weather was on its way. I walked toward the subway station, weaving through the crowds of weekend shoppers who were starting to hurry under the darkening sky. Umbrellas were appearing everywhere, blooming like flowers in the gray air. I didn't have one, but I didn't mind. A little rain never hurt anyone. The subway platform was crowded with people escaping the weather. I found a spot near one of the support pillars and waited for my train, listening to the distant rumble of it approaching through the tunnel. When the train arrived, I squeezed aboard with my grocery bags and found a seat near the back of the car. The doors closed, and we began to move. I settled into my seat, letting the rhythm of the train lull me into that pleasant half-awareness that comes with familiar journeys. It wasn't until I reached my home station and was climbing the stairs to street level that I realized something was wrong. I reached for my wallet to buy a coffee from the cart near the exit, and my hand found only empty space. I patted my jacket pockets, my jeans pockets, the inside pocket where I sometimes kept it. Nothing. My wallet was gone. The panic set in immediately. That cold, tight feeling in your chest when you realize something important is missing. You have no idea where it could be. I thought back through my morning, trying to reconstruct every moment. When had I last used it? At the grocery store to pay for my vegetables and bread. I remembered putting it back in my jacket pocket. Or did I? Had I set it down on the counter? Slipped it into my grocery bag by accident? I rifled through my bags, carefully moving aside the vegetables and bread, hoping to find it tucked among the groceries. It wasn't there. The rain was falling harder now, and people were pushing past me on the stairs, annoyed by my blocking their path. I moved aside and stood under the small awning of the subway entrance, trying to think. My wallet contained everything. my credit cards, my ID, my transit pass. The emergency cash I always kept folded in the back compartment. A small photo of my grandmother that I'd carried since I was 16. That photo was worth more to me than anything else in the wallet. I called the grocery store first. Harried-sounding employee checked the checkout counter and the lost and found, but there was nothing. I called the post office, but they were closed for the day. I called the dry cleaner, and the elderly owner said he would look, but he didn't remember seeing anything. Each call made the cold feeling in my chest grow heavier. I went home feeling defeated. The rain had soaked through my jacket by the time I reached my apartment, and I stood in the entryway, dripping water onto the floor, my grocery bags hanging limply from my hands. I spent the next hour canceling my credit cards and reporting my ID as lost. The customer service representatives were polite but impersonal, their voices reciting scripts they'd delivered 1,000 times before. I went through the motions mechanically, answering their questions and confirming my information. But my mind kept returning to the photo of my grandmother. She had passed away when I was 21. That photo, a small snapshot from a beach trip when I was a child, was one of the few tangible connections I still had to her. In the picture, she's laughing at something outside the frame, her silver hair blowing in the ocean breeze. I'm standing next to her, barely visible at the edge of the photo, my small hand reaching up toward hers. The thought of someone throwing that photo away, not knowing what it meant, made something inside me ache. I tried to distract myself with routine tasks. I unpacked my groceries and put them away. I hung up my dry cleaning. I made myself a sandwich that I didn't really want to eat. The rain continued to fall outside my window, and I watched it without really seeing it. Around 3 in the afternoon, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something made me answer anyway. Hello? Hi. Is this... The voice on the other end hesitated, and I heard papers rustling. I'm sorry. I'm looking at an ID card, and I'm trying to reach the owner. I sat up straighter. That's me. You found my wallet? I think so, the voice said. It was a woman's voice, gentle and warm. I found it on the floor of the subway car this morning. Someone must have kicked it under the seats, because it was wedged pretty far back. I almost missed it. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot I hadn't known I was holding. Oh my God, thank you. Thank you so much. Of course. I tried to find a phone number in the wallet, but there wasn't one. So I did some creative internet searching with the name on your ID, and I found what I think might be your number. I hope I'm not overstepping. Not at all. I'm so grateful. I was sure it was gone forever. She laughed softly. I know that feeling. I lost my wallet once in a taxi, and I was devastated. But someone returned it. Everything intact. I promised myself then that I would always do the same if I ever found someone else's. I asked where we could meet, and she suggested a cafe near her apartment in a neighborhood on the north side of the city. It was a bit of a trip in the rain, but I would have traveled twice as far to get that photo back. The rain had settled into a steady rhythm by the time I left my apartment again. I had an umbrella this time, and I walked to the subway station with something like hope rekindling in my chest. The cafe was called the Amber Cup, and I found it tucked between a flower shop and a small bookstore on a quiet street lined with old trees. The rain dripped from the branches overhead, and the windows of the cafe glowed with warm, inviting light. I stepped inside and looked around. The cafe was cozy and intimate, with mismatched furniture and walls lined with bookshelves. The air smelled of coffee and cinnamon, and soft music played from speakers I couldn't see. A few people were scattered at the tables, reading or working on laptops, or having quiet conversations. A woman at a table near the window waved at me. She was about my age, with dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail and a friendly smile. In front of her on the table was my wallet. "You made it," she said as I approached. "I'm so glad. Please sit down. Can I get you something? Coffee? Tea?" "Tea would be wonderful," I said, sinking into the chair across from her. "Thank you for everything." She slid the wallet across the table to me. "I didn't look through it too much, just enough to find your name and try to track you down. But I noticed there's a photo in one of the pockets. It looked old, important." I opened the wallet and found the photo exactly where it had always been, tucked into the small pocket behind my transit pass. My grandmother's face smiled up at me, her silver hair frozen forever in that ocean breeze. Something in me broke open, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "It's my grandmother," I said, my voice thick. "She passed away years ago. This is one of the only photos I have of her." The woman nodded, her expression soft with understanding. "I thought it might be something like that. That's why I worked so hard to find you. Some things can't be replaced." She ordered tea for both of us, and we sat together as the rain fell outside the window. Her name was May, and she worked as a translator for a small publishing company. She had been on the subway that morning, heading to meet a friend for brunch, when she noticed something wedged under the seats. "I almost left it," she admitted. "I thought someone else would find it, or the transit workers would pick it up at the end of the line. But something made me get up and grab it before my stop. I don't know why, just a feeling." "I'm so glad you followed that feeling," I said. We talked for almost an hour, the way strangers sometimes do when they've been brought together by circumstance. May told me about her work, translating novels from Japanese, the challenges and joys of trying to capture not just words, but feelings in a different language. I told her about my grandmother, about the summers I'd spent at her house by the beach, about the way she used to sing while she cooked. The rain continued outside, but inside the cafe, everything was warm and bright. "Can I ask you something?" May said as we finished our second cups of tea. "Of course. The photo of your grandmother. You said it's one of the only ones you have. Have you ever thought about making copies? Scanning it so you have a backup?" I looked down at the wallet in my hands. "I've thought about it, but there's something about the original, you know. It's the actual paper she touched. The actual photo that was taken on that day. A copy wouldn't be the same. Time, 500 years." May nodded slowly. "I understand that, but maybe you could have both. Keep the original somewhere safe at home and carry a copy with you. That way, if you ever lose your wallet again, you won't lose her." It was such a simple idea, but it had never occurred to me. I'd been carrying that photo with me for so many years that I'd stopped thinking about whether there was a better way. "You're right," I said. "I should do that. I will do that." We exchanged phone numbers before we left the cafe, not because we expected to become close friends, but because some connections deserve to be acknowledged. Some kindnesses deserve to be remembered. May hugged me goodbye on the sidewalk, both of us holding umbrellas. "Take care of yourself," she said, "and take care of that photo." "I will. And thank you." "May, I don't know how I would have managed if you hadn't found it." She smiled and turned to walk away, her umbrella bobbing in the rain. I watched her until she turned the corner, and then I started the walk back to the subway station. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, and the city seemed to glow with a quiet kind of beauty. The streetlights were coming on in the early dusk, their reflections shimmering on the wet pavement. I walked slowly, savoring the feeling of my wallet in my pocket and the photo safe inside it. When I got home, the first thing I did was take the photo out and scan it on my printer. I made 3 copies, one to keep in a drawer, one to put in a frame on my desk, and one to carry in my wallet instead of the original. The original I placed in a small wooden box that had belonged to my grandmother. It seemed fitting. A piece of her kept safe in something that was also hers. That night I made dinner and sat by the window to eat it. The rain had stopped, but the city still glittered with moisture, every surface reflecting the lights from windows and street lamps. I thought about May finding my wallet under the subway seat. I thought about her taking the time to search for my number online, to call me, to meet me at a cafe on a rainy Saturday afternoon. I thought about how easily things could have gone differently, how the wallet could have been found by someone who wouldn't have bothered, how the photo could have been lost forever. But it wasn't, because one person decided to be kind. I looked at the framed copy of the photo now sitting on my desk. My grandmother smiled at me from across the years, her silver hair an ocean breeze, frozen in time. "I'm still here, Grandma," I whispered, "and so are you." The next morning, I sent May a text to thank her again. She responded with a smiley face and a message that said, "Pass it on." And I knew someday I would. The rain returned later that week, gentle and persistent, like it had something else to show me. And there was something else, actually. Another small kindness that arrived when I least expected it, in a coffee shop where I'd stopped to escape the weather. There's a coffee shop I used to visit every Tuesday morning before work. It wasn't on my usual route, which meant I had to leave home 15 minutes earlier to fit it in. But some rituals are worth the inconvenience. And this coffee shop, with its quiet corner tables and excellent lavender lattes, had become one of my essential rituals. The shop was called the Morning Alcove. It occupied the ground floor of an old brownstone on a residential street, sandwiched between apartment buildings and townhouses. There was nothing flashy about it. No neon signs or Instagram-worthy decor. Just warm lighting, comfortable chairs, and the smell of really good coffee. I had discovered it almost by accident, about a year before the day I'm going to tell you about. I'd been walking to a job interview and had gotten off at the wrong subway stop. Lost and nervous, I ducked into the first coffee shop I saw to check my phone and get my bearings. I ordered a coffee just to be polite, not expecting much. But that first sip had stopped me in my tracks. It was perfect, smooth and rich and exactly the right temperature. I'd finished the whole cup before I remembered to check my map, and I'd arrived at my interview slightly late, but strangely calm. I got the job, and I kept coming back to the Morning Alcove. The barista who usually worked the Tuesday morning shift was named Isaiah. He was in his mid-20s, with a warm smile and the kind of calm presence that made the whole shop feel more peaceful. Over the months, we developed the kind of friendly familiarity that regular customers and their favorite baristas sometimes share. He knew my order: lavender latte with oat milk, extra foam. I knew he was studying for a graduate degree in social work, taking classes in the evenings after his shifts ended. We exchanged pleasantries every week, asking about each other's lives in the casual way of people who care but don't want to pry. The Tuesday I'm remembering now was a difficult one. I hadn't slept well the night before. I'd been up late working on a project that wasn't coming together, staring at my computer screen until my eyes ached and my thoughts tangled into useless knots. When my alarm went off, I considered skipping my coffee ritual and taking the extra sleep instead. But something made me get up anyway. Some instinct that said, "Go to the coffee shop. You need it today." The rain was falling when I left my apartment. Not the gentle, romantic rain of poems and movies, but the cold, steady rain that seeps into your bones and makes everything feel heavier. I walked with my umbrella tilted against the wind, watching the water stream along the gutters and pool in the corners of the sidewalk. By the time I reached the morning alcove, I was damp and shivering, despite my rain jacket. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, and the warmth of the shop wrapped around me like a blanket. Isaiah looked up from behind the counter and smiled. "Hey you, rough morning?" I managed a tired smile. "Is it that obvious?" "Little bit. Want your usual?" "Please." I found my regular table in the corner by the window and sat down heavily. The shop was quiet at this hour, just a few other customers scattered at distant tables. Rain streaked down the window beside me, blurring the view of the street outside into soft shapes and muted colors. Isaiah brought my latte over himself instead of calling my name from the counter the way he usually did. He set it down in front of me and pulled out the chair across from mine. "Mind if I sit for a minute? It's slow right now." I gestured for him to sit. "Go ahead." He settled into the chair and studied my face with gentle concern. "You look exhausted, like really exhausted. Are you okay?" I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and sighed. "I'm fine, just didn't sleep well. Work stress, you know? I know that feeling." He nodded slowly. "I was up until 2 a.m. last night working on a paper, but there's tired from lack of sleep, and there's tired that goes deeper. You look like maybe it's the second one." I was quiet for a moment, surprised by his perceptiveness. We'd been exchanging pleasantries for almost a year, but we'd never really talked about anything substantial. This felt like a door opening that I hadn't expected. "Maybe," I admitted. "I've been feeling kind of lost lately, with work, with life. Like I'm going through the motions, but I'm not sure why anymore." Isaiah listened without interrupting. There was something about his attention that made it feel safe to keep talking. "I used to love my job," I continued. "Or at least I used to think I did. But lately, every day feels the same. Wake up, go to work, come home, sleep, repeat. And I keep asking myself, is this it? Is this what the rest of my life is going to look like?" Isaiah nodded thoughtfully. "I think everyone asks themselves that question at some point. It doesn't mean something's wrong with you. It might mean something's right." "What do you mean?" "Well, if you never question things, you'd never grow, right? The discomfort you're feeling, it might be a sign that you're ready for something to change, that you've outgrown the box you're in." I considered this, turning it over in my mind. That's a nice way to think about it. But what if I don't know what I want to change to? What if I'm just stuck? Isaiah smiled gently. Nobody knows at first. That's kind of the point. You're not supposed to have all the answers right away. You just have to be willing to start looking. He glanced toward the counter where another customer had just walked in. Hold on. Let me take care of them. But I want to tell you something when I come back. I nodded and watched him go, sipping my latte slowly. It was perfect, as always. The lavender was just strong enough to taste without overpowering the coffee, and the foam was thick and creamy. I felt the warmth of it spreading through me, easing some of the tension I'd been carrying. The rain continued to fall outside. Other customers came and went. I watched them without really seeing them, my mind turning over what Isaiah had said. Maybe discomfort was a sign of readiness. Maybe feeling stuck meant I was about to become unstuck. It was a hopeful way to frame things, even if I wasn't sure I believed it yet. Isaiah came back about 10 minutes later and slid into the chair again. He was carrying a small piece of paper, which he set on the table between us. So, here's the thing I wanted to tell you, he said. A few years ago, I was exactly where you are now, working a job that paid the bills but didn't mean anything, feeling like I was sleepwalking through my life. He tapped the piece of paper. Then someone gave me this, a flyer for a community center that was looking for volunteers. I almost threw it away, but something made me keep it. And eventually, I went. What happened? It changed everything. I started volunteering at their after-school program, helping kids with homework, just being a consistent presence in their lives. And for the first time in years, I felt like what I was doing mattered. That's when I decided to go back to school for social work. I looked at the paper on the table. It was a flyer for a different organization, a community garden that was looking for volunteers to help with their spring planting. I'm not saying this is your thing, Isaiah said. Gardening might not be what you need, but volunteering, doing something just because it helps, without expecting anything in return, it has a way of opening doors you didn't know existed. I picked up the flyer and studied it. The community garden was just a few blocks from my apartment. I'd walked past it dozens of times without really noticing it. You think this could help? I asked. I think it couldn't hurt. And sometimes that's enough reason to try something. He stood up to go back to the counter, but before he left, he put his hand briefly on my shoulder. You're going to be okay, he said. I can tell. Sometimes it takes a while to find your path, but you will. I looked up at him, grateful in a way I didn't know how to express. Thank you, Isaiah, for the coffee and for this. That's what we're here for, he said, smiling. Not just the coffee. I stayed at my table for another hour that morning, watching the rain and thinking. The flyer sat next to my empty cup, its edges slightly curled from where I'd been holding its spring planting at the community garden. Volunteers needed. No experience necessary. It seemed so small, such a tiny step. And yet as I sat there, something shifted inside me. The heaviness I'd been carrying felt just a little bit lighter. The rain was still falling when I finally left the coffee shop, but I barely noticed it. My mind was somewhere else, somewhere new. I did volunteer at that community garden eventually. Not that same week, but a few weeks later, when the rain had softened into spring showers and the city was beginning to bloom. Isaiah was right. It opened doors I didn't know existed. But that's a story for another time. What I remember most about that rainy Tuesday is the feeling of being seen, of someone noticing that I was struggling and choosing to reach out. It cost Isaiah nothing but a few minutes of his time and a piece of paper, but it meant everything to me. I kept going to the morning alcove every Tuesday after that. Isaiah and I became real friends, the kind who'd text each other about small victories and hard days. He finished his degree the following year, and I went to his graduation ceremony. He cried when he got his diploma. So did I. Some kindness comes from strangers who stay strangers, but some kindness plants seeds that grow into something lasting. That morning in the coffee shop, with the rain falling outside and the warmth of a lavender latte in my hands, I didn't know which kind it would be. I only knew that someone had cared enough to try. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything. The rain brought me other quiet gifts that month, small moments of connection in unexpected places. Like the conversation I had with a stranger in an elevator while the storm rattled the windows of my building. I had lived in my apartment building for 3 years, and I could count on one hand the number of real conversations I'd had with my neighbors. It wasn't that I was unfriendly, and it wasn't that they were unfriendly either. It was just the way of city living, I suppose. Everyone's so careful about respecting boundaries that we ended up walling ourselves off entirely. A nod in the lobby, a half smile in the elevator, a mumbled greeting at the mailboxes. Nothing more. I knew my neighbors by their quirks rather than their names. There was the woman on the 4th floor who always wore headphones and carried yoga mats. The elderly man on the 2nd floor who walked with a cane and collected packages constantly. The young couple on my floor who had a very vocal cat. But the neighbor I thought about most was the one who lived directly across the hall from me. She was somewhere in her 70s, I guessed, with silver hair she wore in a neat bun and a face that seemed to hold both warmth and sorrow in equal measure. I saw her most often in the evenings, returning from wherever she went during the days. She always nodded at me when we passed in the hallway, and sometimes she said hello in a voice that was soft but clear. I nodded back, said hello in return, and then we went into our separate apartments and closed our doors. The night I'm remembering now was in late February. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, the kind of persistent downpour that makes you forget what sunlight looks like. The city felt washed and gray, its edges blurred by sheets of water. I had spent the day working from home, and by evening I was restless. The walls of my apartment felt too close, the silence too heavy. I decided to go for a walk, rain or no rain. Sometimes you need to move your body to unstick your mind. I put on my rain jacket and grabbed my umbrella and headed for the elevator. The elevator in my building is slow. Not dangerously slow, just the kind of slow that makes you question your life choices while you wait for it to arrive. I stood in the hallway listening to its distant machinery groan and clank, watching the floor numbers light up one by one on the display above the doors. I was so focused on the display that I didn't hear her approach. Heading out in this weather, I turned to find my across-the-hall neighbor standing a few feet away. She was bundled in a long wool coat with a scarf wrapped around her neck, and she carried a canvas shopping bag over one arm. "Just need some fresh air," I said. "I've been inside all day." She nodded understandingly. I know that feeling. Sometimes the rain makes the walls shrink, The elevator arrived with a soft ding, and we stepped inside together. She pressed the button for the lobby, and the doors slid closed. We stood in silence for a moment as the elevator began its slow descent. I could hear the rain against the building, a muffled drumming that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then she said, "I don't think we've ever properly introduced ourselves, have we?" I realized she was right. 3 years of living across the hall, and I didn't know her name. "I'm afraid not," I said. "I'm sorry about that." "Don't be sorry. It's the nature of these buildings. Everyone is so private." She extended her hand. "I'm Margaret. It's nice to meet you properly, Margaret." I shook her hand and told her my name. The elevator stopped at the 5th floor, and the doors opened on an empty hallway. No one got on. The doors closed again, and we resumed our descent. "Where are you heading in this rain, if you don't mind my asking?" I said. Margaret adjusted the shopping bag on her arm. "To the little grocery on the corner. I realized I'm out of milk, and I can't have my tea without milk in the morning." "That's a deal breaker," I agreed. She laughed softly. "It really is. My husband used to say I was more particular about my tea than about anything else in life. He wasn't wrong." Something in the past tense of "used to say" made me pause. But before I could decide whether to ask, the elevator stopped again, this time between floors. The lights flickered, the elevator groaned, and then everything went still. "Oh dear," Margaret said calmly. I looked at the floor display, which was dark now. The elevator hung motionless, suspended somewhere between the 3rd and 2nd floors. The emergency lighting clicked on, casting the small space in a dim amber glow. "I think we're stuck," I said, stating the obvious. "It would appear so." I pressed the emergency button on the panel. Somewhere distant, a bell began to ring. After a moment, a crackling voice came through the speaker, the building's security guard, asking if we were okay. "We're fine," I said, "just stuck between floors." "Power's out in the whole neighborhood," the guard said. "Storm took down some lines. Fire department's on the way, but it might be a while. You two sit tight, okay?" "We will," I said. "Thank you." The speaker went silent, and I turned to Margaret. "Are you all right? Do you need to sit down?" "I'm fine, dear. These old bones have weathered worse than a stuck elevator." She lowered herself carefully onto the small bench built into the elevator wall. "Though I won't say no to sitting." I sat down on the bench beside her, leaving a respectful distance between us. Outside, I could hear the rain intensifying, pounding against the building like it wanted to come inside. Time, 700 minutes. "Well," Margaret said, folding her hands in her lap, "I suppose this is one way to finally have a proper conversation." I laughed despite the circumstances. "I was just thinking the same thing." "Tell me about yourself," she said. "We might be here a while. Might as well get to know each other." So I did. I told her about my job, which sounded boring when I described it, but was actually satisfying in its own quiet way. I told her about the book I was trying to write on weekends, the novel that had been almost done for 2 years now. I told her about my family back home, my parents who called every Sunday, and my sister who texted me photos of her garden. Margaret listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was paying attention. She had a way of making you feel like what you said mattered, even when you were just rambling about everyday things. "And what about you?" I asked when I'd run out of things to say about myself. How long have you lived in the building? Almost 40 years, she said. My husband and I moved here right after we got married. It was a different neighborhood then. More families, more children running in the hallways. That's a long time. It is. This apartment holds a lot of memories. She paused, and something shifted in her expression. He passed away 2 years ago. My husband. Heart attack. Very sudden. I felt the words settle between us. I'm so sorry, Margaret. Thank you, dear. It was hard. Still is sometimes. But I've learned to carry the grief alongside the love. They're not as separate as you might think. I didn't know what to say to that. It seemed like the kind of wisdom that could only come from living through something impossible. Do you have family nearby? I asked. A daughter. She lives upstate with her husband and my grandchildren. She wants me to move closer to them, but Margaret shook her head gently. I can't leave this apartment. He's still here, in a way. In the walls, in the light through the windows, in the view from the balcony. If I left, I'd be leaving him. The rain drummed against the building. The emergency lights cast their soft amber glow. And I sat with this woman I'd lived across from for 3 years, finally understanding something about the quiet sorrow I'd always seen in her face. That makes sense, I said quietly. I think I'd feel the same way. Margaret smiled at me, and there was warmth in it despite the sadness. He would have liked you. Edward, that was his name. He was always trying to get to know the neighbors, always inviting people over for dinner. I was the shy one. He was the one who made friends. You don't seem shy to me, I said. I've learned. Grief teaches you things. It teaches you that time is short and connections matter, and you shouldn't wait for perfect circumstances to reach out to people. She looked at me directly then, her eyes clear and kind. I've wanted to knock on your door so many times, she said, just to say hello properly, to invite you for tea. But I kept putting it off, telling myself you were probably too busy, probably didn't want to be bothered by an old woman. I felt something catch in my chest. I would have loved that. Would you still? When we get out of here, I mean. I smiled. I'd really like that, Margaret. How about tomorrow afternoon, if the rain stops? Tomorrow would be perfect. We sat in comfortable silence for a while after that. The rain continued outside, and somewhere in the building, I could hear the distant sound of doors opening and closing as other people navigated the darkness. Margaret told me about Edward, about how they'd met at a dance in 1965, when she was wearing a yellow dress, and he was too nervous to ask her to waltz, about their honeymoon in Italy, where they got lost in Venice and ended up at a tiny restaurant that served the best pasta either of them had ever tasted, about the Sunday mornings they spent reading newspapers in bed, arguing about politics and crossword puzzles. Listened to her stories, and I could see the love in every word. 40 years of marriage, and she still spoke about him like he was the most wonderful thing that had ever happened to her. About an hour into our wait, the lights flickered and came back on. The elevator hummed to life around us. A moment later, we were descending again, smooth and steady. The doors opened on the lobby, where the security guard was waiting with a flashlight and a relieved expression. You two okay? We're fine, Margaret said, rising from the bench with surprising grace. We had a lovely chat, actually. I helped her up and we walked out of the elevator together. The lobby was lit again, the storm still raging outside the glass doors. You know, Margaret said, I don't think I need that milk tonight after all. I'll just have my tea, black in the morning. One day won't hurt. Are you sure? I could go for you." She shook her head. "No, dear. I think I'd rather go upstairs and look at some old photo albums. Our conversation made me want to remember." We took the elevator back up together, since the power was restored. At our floor, we stepped out into the hallway and stood for a moment between our two doors. "Thank you for the company," Margaret said. "It's been a long time since I talked about Edward like that. It felt good. Thank you for sharing him with me. He sounds like he was a wonderful man." He was. She reached out and touched my arm gently. "I'll see you tomorrow for tea." "I'll be there." We went into our separate apartments, but this time it felt different. The hallway between our doors felt like a bridge instead of a barrier. Something had shifted. I did go for tea the next afternoon. Margaret made Earl Grey and served it with shortbread cookies she'd baked that morning. Her apartment was full of photographs and books and soft, worn furniture that had clearly been loved for decades. We talked for 3 hours about everything and nothing, about Edward and my novel and the way the city changes and stays the same. After that, tea became a regular thing. Every Sunday afternoon, I knocked on her door and she welcomed me in. Sometimes we played cards. Sometimes we just sat and watched the light change through her windows. She became one of my closest friends. The kind of friend I never expected to find, living right across the hall the whole time. All it took was a stuck elevator and a rainy night to break through the walls we'd built without meaning to. Sometimes I wonder how many other people are waiting behind their doors. How many connections we miss because we're too polite, or too busy, or too afraid to reach out. Margaret taught me that the reaching is worth it. That loneliness is just closeness that hasn't happened yet. The rain kept falling that winter, and the city kept revealing its quiet kindnesses to me. One evening, I came home to find something unexpected waiting at my door. A small note from a stranger, and a gift that made me smile for days. And sometimes, in the gentlest way possible, the universe reminds you that you're not invisible. That even in a city of millions, someone notices when you're struggling. Someone cares enough to reach out, even if they don't quite know how. This is a story about a note I found on my doorstep, about the rain that wouldn't stop, and about learning that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the biggest meaning. It had been one of those weeks, the kind where everything feels slightly too heavy, slightly too much. Nothing catastrophic had happened, nothing I could point to and say, "This is why I feel so tired." It was more like a slow accumulation. Too many early mornings, too many late nights, too many small disappointments stacking up like coins in a jar nobody wanted. My apartment had started reflecting my mood. Dishes I'd been meaning to wash for days. Laundry that lived permanently in the basket. Blinds I hadn't opened because the gray sky felt too heavy to look at. The rain had been falling for 6 days straight. Not dramatic rain, not the kind that makes you want to stand at the window and feel poetic. Just steady, persistent, gray. The kind that seeps into your bones and makes everything feel damp and tired. I lived in a small apartment building on a quiet street. 4 floors, 8 units, the kind of place where everyone knows each other's faces, but not necessarily their names. I'd moved in almost 2 years ago, right after a job change that had felt exciting at the time. Now the excitement had faded into routine. Good routine, mostly, but routine nonetheless. It It was a Thursday evening when I found the note. I was coming home from work later than usual because I'd stayed to finish a project I'd been procrastinating on. The rain was still falling, soft but insistent. My umbrella was the cheap kind from the convenience store, black and slightly too small. One of the spokes had started bending inward, so water kept dripping onto my shoulder. I'd been meaning to replace it for weeks. The building's entrance was warm and dry. The familiar smell of old carpet and someone's dinner cooking on the second floor. I checked my mailbox out of habit, finding nothing but a credit card offer and a flyer for pizza delivery. I climbed the stairs slowly, my bag heavy on my shoulder. Third floor, apartment 3B. The hallway was quiet, the sound of rain muffled through the building's walls. That's when I noticed something sitting on my doormat. At first I thought it was a package, maybe something I'd ordered and forgotten about. But as I got closer, I saw it was smaller than that. A small brown paper bag, the kind from a bakery, and tucked underneath it, a folded piece of paper. I stood there for a moment, confused. Maybe it was delivered to the wrong apartment, but no, it was definitely on my mat, positioned carefully in front of my door. I bent down and picked up the note first. It was written on simple lined paper, the kind torn from a spiral notebook. The handwriting was neat, but a little uneven, like someone had taken their time, but still felt uncertain. The note said, "Hi, neighbor. I hope this isn't weird. I've noticed you've seemed a bit down lately when I see you in the hallway. I'm not good at talking to people, but I wanted you to know someone notices. These are from the bakery on Maple Street. The chocolate ones are really good. You don't have to say anything or do anything. Just wanted you to have something nice today. Your neighbor from 3A." I read the note 3 times, standing there in the quiet hallway. The rain was still falling outside. I could hear it against the window at the end of the hall. But something in my chest felt suddenly warm. 3A. That was the apartment right next to mine. A woman lived there, I was pretty sure. I'd seen her a handful of times in the 2 years I'd lived here. She was quiet, maybe in her late 30s or early 40s. Brown hair that she usually wore pulled back. She always seemed to be carrying books or bags of groceries. We'd exchanged polite nods in the hallway, but never really spoken. I opened the paper bag carefully. Inside were 4 small pastries, 2 chocolate croissants, slightly warm like they'd been bought recently, and 2 almond cookies with powdered sugar. I stood there holding the bag, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes, which felt ridiculous. It was just pastries. It was just a note from someone I barely knew. But it wasn't just pastries. It was someone saying, "I see you." It was someone saying, "You matter enough for me to notice." Time 900 moons. I unlocked my door and stepped inside my dim apartment. For the first time in days, I actually turned on the lights properly instead of just a small lamp by my bed. The space looked different somehow. Still messy, still tired, but less overwhelming. I set the bag on my kitchen counter and reread the note. I'm not good at talking to people. Something about that line stayed with me. The honesty of it, the vulnerability. She could have just said nothing. She could have kept walking past me in the hallway, nodding politely, living her separate life. That's what most people do in apartment buildings. That's what I had done. But she'd chosen to reach out. Even though it was awkward, even though she wasn't sure how. She'd gone to a bakery, picked out pastries, written a note, and left them on my doorstep. I ate one of the chocolate croissants standing at my kitchen counter. She was right. They were really good, buttery and flaky, the chocolate still slightly soft in the middle. The rain was still falling outside my window, but it sounded different now. Less dreary, more like background music, like the soundtrack to something gentle happening. I thought about what to do next. Part of me wanted to immediately knock on her door, thank her in person, maybe ask her to come in for tea. But the note had said, "You don't have to say anything or do anything." She'd given me permission to receive kindness without any obligation attached. That felt important somehow, like she understood that sometimes people are too tired to reciprocate immediately. Sometimes you just need to accept something nice without it becoming another task on your list. So I didn't knock on her door that night. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I washed the dishes that had been piling up in my sink. Not all of them. Just enough to make the kitchen feel less chaotic. The warm water felt good on my hands. The simple, repetitive motion felt almost meditative. Then I made myself a proper dinner instead of the instant noodles I'd been planning on. Just pasta with olive oil and some vegetables from my fridge that were about to go bad. Nothing fancy, but real food that I sat down to eat at my actual table. While I ate, I thought about my neighbor in 3A. I realized I didn't even know her name. 2 years of living 10 feet apart, and I'd never asked. What kind of life did she have? Did she work from home? I sometimes heard soft music through the walls in the evenings, classical stuff mostly, and occasionally the sound of a sewing machine, that distinctive rhythmic whir. She'd noticed I seemed down, which meant she'd been paying attention. In the small moments we'd passed each other, she'd been seeing me. Not just my physical presence, but something underneath. That felt both touching and slightly embarrassing. Had I been that obvious, walking around with my sadness visible on my face, like a sign I didn't know I was wearing? But she hadn't judged me for it. She'd just offered kindness. Simple, no strings attached kindness in the form of pastries and a handwritten note. The rain continued through the night. I fell asleep earlier than I had in weeks, my stomach full of pasta and chocolate croissant. And for the first time in a while, I didn't wake up in the middle of the night with that restless, anxious feeling. Friday morning arrived gray and damp, but I felt different. I opened my blinds for the first time in days and looked out at the wet street below. A woman was walking her dog, both of them wearing matching yellow raincoats. I found myself smiling at the sight. Time 600 minutes. I got ready for work with more care than usual, actually dried my hair instead of letting it air dry, wore a sweater I liked instead of the first thing I grabbed. Small choices, but they felt like choices instead of just going through motions. On my way out, I paused in front of apartment 3A. I could hear soft music playing inside, something with strings and piano. I thought about knocking, but it was early, and I didn't want to disturb her morning routine. Instead, I made a mental note. I would respond to her kindness, but I would do it thoughtfully, not out of obligation, but because I genuinely wanted to. Work that day was still work. The same emails, the same meetings, the same low-grade stress that had been wearing me down. But I noticed it differently, like there was a small buffer of warmth between me and the demands of the day. During my lunch break, instead of eating at my desk like I usually did, I walked to a bookstore a few blocks away. The rain had softened to a mist, and I actually used my broken umbrella properly this time. The bookstore was the kind of place I used to love visiting, but had stopped making time for. Narrow aisles, books stacked everywhere, that particular smell of paper and possibility. I spent 20 minutes just wandering, letting my fingers trail along spines. I found a book about handwritten letters, a collection of correspondence between famous writers and their friends. Something about it felt connected to the note I'd received. Wustatofias, power of words on paper, given from one person to another. I bought the book and also a small notebook with a blue cover. The pages were lined, similar to the paper my neighbor had used for her note. An idea was forming in my mind, though I wasn't ready to fully shape it yet. After work, I stopped at the bakery on Maple Street. I'd never been there before, though I'd walked past it hundreds of times. It was small and warm, the windows fogged from the ovens, the air thick with the smell of butter and sugar. An older man behind the counter smiled when I came in. "Rainy day," he observed, as if commenting on a fact we both found pleasant. "It is," I agreed. I looked at the display case, at the chocolate croissants my neighbor had recommended. There were also small fruit tarts, macarons in pastel colors, bread loaves with golden crusts. Everything looked handmade and cared for. "First time here?" the man asked, reading my expression. "Yes. Someone gave me pastries from here yesterday. They were really good." He nodded, clearly pleased. "We make everything fresh. Nothing sits more than a day." I bought a selection of things. Chocolate croissants again, because they really were excellent, a small loaf of rosemary bread, and a slice of something called grandmother's apple cake that looked impossibly homey. Walking home with my paper bag of pastries, I felt something I hadn't felt in a while. Anticipation. The pleasant kind, not the anxious kind. I was looking forward to something, even if that something was just going home and eating cake. The rain had picked up again by the time I reached my building. I shook off my umbrella in the entrance and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The hallway was quiet, as always. I paused again in front of 3A. The music was playing again, different this time. Something with a cello, low and beautiful. I could see a sliver of warm light under her door. I went into my apartment and set down my things. Then I took out the notebook I'd bought at the bookstore and sat down at my table. For a moment, I just looked at the blank page. What do you say to someone who offered you kindness without expecting anything back? How do you thank someone for seeing you when you felt invisible? I started writing. "Dear neighbor from 3A, thank you for the pastries and the note. You were right. The chocolate ones were really good. I went to the bakery on Maple Street today, and now I understand why you recommended it. I want you to know that your kindness meant more than I can easily explain. You were right that I've been having a hard time lately. Nothing dramatic, just the kind of tired that accumulates. And I'd started to feel invisible, like I was just going through motions without anyone really seeing me. Your note reminded me that I'm not invisible, that someone notices. That was a gift bigger than any pastry. I'm not great at talking to people either, but maybe we could try sometime. I'd like to know your name. I'd like to share a cup of tea and find out about the music you listen to. I can hear it through the walls sometimes, and it's beautiful. No pressure, no obligation. Just an open door if you ever want to knock. With gratitude, your neighbor from 3B. I read the letter over a few times, wondering if it was too much. But she had been honest with me, hadn't she? She'd admitted she wasn't good at talking to people. The least I could do was meet her honesty with my own. I folded the note carefully and put it in an envelope from my desk drawer. Then I wrapped up one of the chocolate croissants in a napkin and placed it in a small paper bag, returning the gesture in a small way. The hallway was still quiet when I stepped outside. The music from 3A had stopped, replaced by gentle silence. I placed my envelope and the small bag carefully on her doormat, exactly as she had done for me. Then I went back to my apartment and made tea. I ate the apple cake standing at my window, watching the rain fall on the street below. The grandmother's apple cake was exactly as good as it looked. Cinnamon and brown sugar and soft fruit that melted on my tongue. I thought about how strange life is sometimes, how you can live 10 feet from someone for 2 years and never really see them. And then one rainy Thursday, everything shifts. The rain continued into the night. I read some of the book about letters, the correspondence between writers who lived in different countries, but maintained friendships through words on paper. There was something beautiful about the slowness of it, the intentionality of sitting down to write, to fold, to send. Around 9 o'clock, I heard a soft knock on my door. Just 2 quiet taps, almost hesitant. My heart beat a little faster as I went to answer it. She was standing in the hallway, my neighbor from 3A. Brown hair pulled back as always, wearing a soft gray cardigan. She was holding my envelope in her hands, and she looked nervous but also a little hopeful. "Hi," she said quietly. "I'm Margaret. I should have introduced myself a long time ago." I smiled, feeling suddenly lighter than I had in weeks. "I'm Jamie. Do you want to come in for tea?" She hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like that very much. Time 900 milks." She came inside, and I realized it was the first time anyone had visited my apartment in months. I apologized for the mess, but she waved it away. "It looks lived in," she said. "That's a good thing." I made tea while she sat at my table. We were both a little awkward at first, both a little uncertain how to navigate this new space we'd opened between us. But the awkwardness felt gentle rather than uncomfortable, like we were both acknowledging that connection takes time, and that was okay. "I loved your note," she said when I sat down across from her, "and the croissant. That was sweet of you." "You started it," I pointed out. "I just returned the favor." She smiled, a small genuine smile that made her look younger somehow. We talked for almost 2 hours that night. I learned that Margaret worked as a freelance translator, mostly French and German documents, that she'd moved to the city from a small town up north about 5 years ago, that she sewed her own curtains and grew herbs on her windowsill. The music I heard through the walls was from a classical radio station she kept on while she worked. "It helps me focus," she explained, "and I like the company, even if it's just instruments." I told her about my job, about the tiredness that had been accumulating, about feeling like I'd been running on empty without knowing how to refuel. She listened without trying to fix anything, which was exactly what I needed. "I noticed because I've been there," she said quietly. "A few years ago, after my divorce, I remember what it looks like on someone's face, that kind of tired. So you decided to buy me pastries?" I decided to do what I wish someone had done for me. The rain was still falling when she finally went back to her apartment. We made plans to have dinner together sometime the following week. Nothing fancy, just ordering takeout and eating together instead of separately in our adjacent apartments. "Thank you," I said at my door, "for noticing, for caring enough to do something about it." She shook her head. "Thank you for responding. I was so nervous that note would be weird or unwelcome." I watched her walk the few steps to her own door. "Margaret?" She turned back. "The music you play. I really do like hearing it through the walls. It makes me feel less alone." She smiled that small, genuine smile again. "I'll play it a little louder then." That night I fell asleep to the faint sound of a piano sonata drifting through my wall. The rain was still tapping against my window, but my apartment felt different now. Less like a place I was just existing in, more like a home. The following week passed differently than the ones before. I still went to work, still dealt with emails and meetings and deadlines. But I opened my blinds every morning now. I made real meals instead of instant noodles. I stopped at the bakery on Maple Street twice more, getting to know the owner, whose name was Bernard. Margaret and I had dinner together on Tuesday. We ordered Thai food and ate it at her table, which was covered with a beautiful handmade cloth she'd brought back from a trip to Provence. Her apartment smelled like lavender and old books. Her herbs grew on the windowsill, just like she'd said. We talked about books and music and the small pleasures of living alone in a city, about how hard it can be to make friends as an adult when there's no built-in structure like school or clubs, about how sometimes the bravest thing is just reaching out, even awkwardly. The rain eventually stopped after almost 2 weeks of falling. The city emerged damp and gleaming, puddles catching the light. I walked home from work on the first dry evening and noticed things I'd stopped seeing. Window boxes with flowers, a cat sleeping in a shop window, the way the wet pavement reflected the sunset. Margaret was in the hallway when I got home, just locking her door to go out. "Hi, neighbor," she said, and the word felt different now. Not just a geographical description, but something warmer. "Hi, neighbor," I echoed. "Where are you headed?" "Bernard just texted me. He made extra rosemary bread and is closing in 10 minutes. Want to walk with me?" I thought about my tired feet, about the long day I'd had, and then I thought about fresh bread, about company, about the small pleasures of living. "I'd love to," I said. We walked to the bakery together through the damp evening streets. The air smelled clean and fresh, washed by all that rain. Bernard gave us each a small loaf of rosemary bread, still warm from the oven. He seemed pleased to see Margaret with a friend. "You're the one she left the pastries for," he observed, looking at me with knowing eyes. "I am." "Good." He nodded firmly. "Good. She needs more people in her life. We all do." Walking home, Margaret and I talked about starting a little tradition. Tuesday dinners at one of our apartments. Maybe Sunday morning walks when the weather was nice. Nothing overwhelming. Nothing that felt like obligation. Just the gentle commitment of showing up for each other. "I'm glad I left that note," Margaret said as we reached our building. "I'm glad, too. I almost didn't. I wrote it 3 times before I got the words right." 3 times? The first one was too formal. The second was too casual. The third felt honest. "It was perfect," I told her. It was exactly what I needed. We parted at our doors, her to 3A, me to 3B. The distance between our apartments was maybe 5 steps, but the connection between us now felt like it spanned something much larger. I went inside and ate bread with butter, looking out my window at the city lights. The sky was clear now, stars visible for the first time in weeks. Through the wall, I could hear Margaret's radio starting up again. Something with violins, something hopeful. I thought about kindness, about how it can arrive in the smallest forms. A note on a doorstep, pastries from a bakery. About how it ripples outward, the way a stone dropped in still water creates circles that keep expanding. Margaret had been kind to me, and now I found myself noticing others more. The tired-looking barista at the coffee shop, who I made sure to thank genuinely. The colleague who always seemed a little overwhelmed, who I asked how she was really doing. The neighbor downstairs, who I finally introduced myself to after 18 months of polite nods. Kindness multiplies when you receive it openly, when you let it change you instead of just thanking it and moving on, when you pass it forward, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. I kept the original note Margaret had written me. I pressed it flat and put it in the back of my new notebook, the one with the blue cover. Sometimes I take it out and read it again. Just wanted you to have something nice today. Such a simple sentence, such a small act, but it changed the shape of my days. It reminded me that even in a city of millions, we're not as alone as we sometimes feel, that there are people who notice, people who care, people who leave notes on doorsteps because they remember what it felt like to need kindness themselves. The rain has come back since then, as it always does in the city, but I don't mind it the way I used to. Now when I hear it against my window, I think of chocolate croissants and handwritten notes, of Margaret's violin sonatas drifting through my wall, of Bernard at the bakery, kneading bread before dawn. I think of all the small kindnesses that hold a city together, the ones we give and the ones we receive, the umbrellas shared and the doors held open, the notes left for strangers who aren't really strangers anymore. And I fall asleep grateful. Not because everything is perfect or easy, but because someone noticed, because someone cared, because a few words on paper reminded me that I matter. That's the thing about kindness. It doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be real. It just has to be given. And sometimes on a rainy Thursday evening, when you least expect it, a doorstep note can change everything. And so, my friend, we come to the end of tonight's stories. 5 moments of kindness shared in the gentle hush of the rain. An umbrella offered to a stranger. A wallet returned with grace. A barista who noticed what you needed before you asked. A conversation in an elevator that became something more. And a note on a doorstep that reminded someone they weren't invisible. I hope these stories have wrapped around you like a warm blanket. I hope the sound of rain, whether real or imagined, has softened the edges of your day. If you're lying in bed, let your eyes grow heavy now. Let the tension in your shoulders melt away. There's nothing you need to do tonight. Nothing you need to solve or fix or worry about. Just rest. Just breathe. Just let the rain carry you gently towards sleep. I'll be here when you come back, with more quiet streets and warm cafes, more kind strangers and cozy corners, more rainy nights made for dreaming. Sweet dreams, dear listener. May your sleep be deep and your dreams be gentle. Good night.